Hi, I'm Ross Miles from Pro Football Focus Fantasy. Welcome to the Fantasy Slant. I'm going to talk a little bit today about tackle frequencies, tackles, and generally finding hidden value in players for those in IDP leagues, because as we all know, finding the hidden value, the sleepers, the underdrafted players is what wins you your fantasy championship, and that's what we're all here for. So the reason we want to talk about tackles is because they're pretty much the bread and butter of all IDP scoring systems. Tackles are the most frequent scoring statistic for a defensive player, much more so than interceptions, sacks, forced fumbles, these other kind of big plays. So for an analyst like myself, this is great because these are the most projectable and most predictable statistics when looking and forecasting players' performances for the following season. Now, obviously, one of the key indicators in whether you can make a lot of tackles is the amount of time you spend on the field, the number of snaps you play. And that's probably why you've heard a lot of IDP guys talking about every down linebackers or every down players. The reason we talk about those kind of players is because they have the most time on the field and therefore the most opportunity to make tackles. But looking at the player who had the most tackles the previous season doesn't always indicate future fantasy success. The reason that is because total tackles is a cumulative statistic. What we're trying to do is look for frequency, so a rate of occurrence really. So if a player perhaps only played 3/4 of the snaps of another player and they had the same tackles, who would you rather have? You'd rather have the guy who played less snaps, therefore a higher tackle frequency. But just to clear it up, what tackle frequency actually is the total number of tackles a player made divided by the number of snaps they played on the field that season. So when we're looking at linebackers, generally we're talking above 14.5% to be a linebacker one, a top 12 linebacker. So if we look at, for instance, last season, Vontaze Burfict, one of the top linebackers in fantasy football, 17%. We cast ourselves back another season, Luke Kuechly's phenomenal season, 18.6%. So these are kind of, league leading numbers. These guys are recording tackles at a pace which makes them a lock to be a linebacker one. If we're looking at guys in the second tier, that's normally between 14 and 12%. If you get around 12% tackle frequency or below, we're thinking about guys like D'Amico Ryans, 11.5% last year. David Harris, for example, 11.9% last year. So you can see there's a difference here in the rate at which these guys are recording tackles, and that is a great way of helping identify players for future seasons that are going to have fantasy value. So what you want to try and do really is find players that didn't play a full quota of snaps. For example, maybe they were only a role player, maybe they were only a 2-down player looking to step up. And you can really find those guys and look at their tackle frequency. If their recording frequency is over 13%, these are guys that are going to have fantasy value in future seasons. If we take a look back at last year, some of the performers, and we're wondering why there's been such a change in the linebacker market. For example, Kiko Alonso really took the league by storm. He had a 14.6% tackle frequency, so he's really pushing on in the elite level there. Lavonte David, not only did he make 20 tackles for a loss last year, he had a 14.7% tackle frequency. Again, this is above this kind of 14.5% threshold. It really indicates that you are a top-class linebacker. But there were some other players last year that we maybe expected some more out of. So Patrick Willis, he was a lock. He was probably the top linebacker in IDP fantasy football just a couple of seasons ago, maybe 3. His tackle frequency is now down to 12.5%, playing alongside Navarro Bowman. Another player who we saw drop away was James Laurinaitis last season. He only recorded a tackle frequency of 11.6%. Disappointed for a player of his caliber who'd been up in the 13.7% kind of area the year before. So that's my tip for today for you guys. Tackle frequency is the secret to finding out whether that player has future fantasy value in IDP leagues. I've been Ross Miles for Pro Football Focus Fantasy. Listen in next time.